According to 1950s American advertisers, two people with straws in the same drink is the start of a dreamy relationship. Sharing a beverage is an act of intimacy, of trust, of cooperation. Also, you get all up in each other's business. I am sure everything from this era has aged just fine. Oh, oh, oh no. So, it turns out that maybe two straws, one cup isn't a fast track to a happy marriage, especially if the straws are bore wells and the cup is a multi-millennia old aquifer on an international border. There are nearly 500 identified transboundary aquifers and aquifer systems around the world, and countries have a really hard time cooperating over them. One bright spot of collaboration, however, comes from an unlikely candidate. The Guaraní Aquifer System, or GAS, is the largest groundwater system on the planet. It lies beneath not two, not three, but four different countries in South America: Uruguay, Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil. Since its discovery in 1996, these four countries have led the way in modeling cooperation and joint governance over this shared resource. But how and why? Let's drill down to understand a bit more about how aquifers work and what local factors contributed to the GAS's unprecedented success at joint governance. So, what's an aquifer and how do they work? An aquifer is a body of permeable rock that water flows through. You know when you're digging in the sand at the beach and you eventually get deep enough that it fills with water, and no matter how much water you scoop out, more water will flow through the sandy walls to fill it back up again? It's like that, but usually deeper and usually not connected to the ocean. They aren't giant underground caverns with water. Those do exist and will definitely come up in another video, but are more like giant underground rivers or lakes flowing through gaps in the rocks. Water enters an aquifer on the surface through a recharge-discharge zone. When it rains, water flows down into the earth until it reaches the rock that's already been fully saturated. The top of the saturated zone is called the water table. It's like sea level for groundwater. If the elevation of the ground goes down, the water table stays the same, and the groundwater becomes surface water. That's not to say all water tables are flat, far from it, but their shape is determined mostly by the characteristics of the medium they are flowing through. So, for example, if you have rock that's easy for water to flow through, sandwiched between two layers of rock that are difficult for water to flow through, the aquifer's water table will be confined by the shape of those layers. Water in these confined aquifers can take a long time to cycle back up to the surface, like tens of thousands of years long time. But fun stuff starts happening when one side of the confined area ends up at a higher elevation than the other. In this case, the higher end becomes predominantly a recharge zone, the lower end predominantly a discharge zone, and the confined area between functioning like an underground river between the two. This is the case of the GAS. The aquifer's 50,000 cubic kilometers of groundwater largely recharges in four main areas, circled in red, and largely discharges in two main regions, circled in green. Everywhere else, the aquifer is confined. If you want to get at the water there, you're going to have to dig pretty deep. But before you do that, think carefully. There's plenty of water on the surface. When it comes to river basins, South America goes hard. The GAS sits atop the watersheds of the Uruguay River, along with the many tributaries of the La Plata River Basin, shorthand of LPRB. They may not be able to match the Amazon in raw discharge volume, but they are the lifeblood of densely populated urban areas and vast swaths of agricultural land. These river basins irrigate the fields and quench the thirst of 70 million people. From soy to cattle, to factories, to apartments, Freshwater is essential for every social and ecological system at play, and there's only so much to go around. Every country has a duty to secure their population with access to the water they need. But none here have complete control over the rivers and aquifers on which they depend. To manage this shared resource, they have had to work together. In 2010, the GAS became the first major aquifer system in the world to have a multi-state agreement for joint governance. To understand how that came to be, let's look at the institutional history of regional cooperation. The GAS states had a long history of surface water governance upon which to build. Between 1970 and 2010, 18 different treaties on surface water governance were signed by at least 2 of the 4 GAS members. While initially only cooperating on joint hydroelectric projects, agreements quickly grew into comprehensive water governance. These negotiations were made necessary, and more complicated, by the asymmetrical regional geography. Brazil's disproportionate control over water resources, controlling 64% of LPRB's total outflow, positions it as a hydro-hegemon, able to exert significant influence on its southern neighbors. Exploiting asymmetry for geopolitical gain has produced military escalation in multiple cases, most notably in 1965 with Paraguay. Enforcing terms on Brazil is extremely difficult, and to secure a stable outlook for regional water use, all the countries had to cooperate. The Guaraní Aquifer System has a similar level of asymmetry to the LPRB. 71% of the aquifer's area and over 90% of yearly exploitation falls inside Brazil, all while making up a smaller proportion of Brazil's water budget than any of the other GAS states. At the national level, this positions Brazil as the party with the greatest level of control but the lowest potential risk exposure. While the aquifer is capable of recharge, 80% of stored water has been in the ground for between 4,000 and 100,000 years. This reserve is rapidly depleting. In a classic tragedy of the commons scenario, without a shared system to govern this joint resource, everyone is incentivized to drink as much as they can as quickly as possible. The more access you have, the more you miss out by acting responsibly. While local considerations complicate this generalization, the level of asymmetry in the GAS poses enormous cooperation challenges. Furthermore, decades of negotiation over the LPRB under similar circumstances produced a robust body of cooperative precedent that carried over to the GAS. Another factor enabling these countries to overcome their geographic imbalances is the extensive pre-existing institutional infrastructure. In 1991, Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay became the founding members of Mercosur. Based upon the OAS, ECLAC, and IDB, this now continent-wide common market not only demonstrates a unique level of regional will to cooperate, but itself offers a forum for joint economic governance. Most significantly, the increased flow of transboundary trade increased entanglement of local border communities. Respectively, Argentinian and Brazilian municipalities signed the Concordia Salto Agreement in 2017. Acting independently of their central governments, these local communities established a joint groundwater commission to monitor aquifer resources and inform joint policy. At both the local and national levels, transboundary aquifer governance was enabled by institutionalized regional integration. Once the scientific community reconceptualized the local groundwater networks as part of a single transboundary aquifer, constituent states began a joint research program known as the Guaraní Project in 2002. This led to the groundbreaking Guaraní Aquifer Agreement, GAA, in 2010, the first attempt at transboundary aquifer governance in the southern cone of South America. In April 2018, the government of Paraguay became the fourth and final party to ratify the Guaraní Aquifer Agreement. putting into force, in 2020, almost a decade of negotiation. The conditions that enabled such cooperation in the first place, and the constraints that added 8 years to the pre-ratification posturing, offer critical insights for the future of transboundary aquifer governance. To conclude this exploration, it is prudent to discuss the GAA's future. The GAA is only as strong as the mutual commitment of each party, and in particular, the strongest party. Brazil's asymmetrical position as preeminent hydrohegemon did not disappear after it signed the Guaraní Aquifer Agreement. Brazil merely agreed to play nice. Since 2010, however, Brazil's political landscape has swung like a pendulum, with the election of the far-right leader Jair Bolsonaro in 2018. During his time in office, Bolsonaro deregulated resource extraction domestically and antagonized its neighbors internationally, even calling for the dissolution of Mercosur. Moreover, the state within Brazil most dependent upon GAS resources, São Paulo, was key to Bolsonaro's electoral victory. While the GAA successfully entered into force in November of 2020, and Bolsonaro failed to win re-election and was replaced by Lula da Silva in 2022, this episode demonstrates the fragility of credible commitments in a shifting geopolitical environment, and the need for effective governance may only be increasing. Recent studies have indicated that the rate of aquifer recharge is lower than initially estimated, requiring even more conservative water budgets if the aquifer is to be stewarded effectively. While the tension between regional asymmetry and cooperative precedent clearly defines the GAS as a case study, one must be cautious before generalizing too far. The high multilaterality, extreme asymmetry, and extensive acumen of regional institutions finds few comparable analogs elsewhere in the world. The Guaraní Aquifer System may be an edge case in transboundary aquifer governance, if, albeit, a pioneering one. That said, the core principles themselves remain abstract enough to transcend the Guaraní Aquifer System case, even if other cases present additional or alternative dynamics. Aquifer asymmetry and cooperative precedent remain compelling pillars to formulating new approaches to evaluate future transboundary aquifer governance prospects. While requiring additional study to determine broader generalizability, the GAS case illustrates their strong explanatory potential.